You determine. As the story goes, a woman had been driving down a somewhat secluded road when her car broke down. She had been stranded by the side of the road for more than an hour. It was an expensive car, a car that spoke to the wealth of the woman inside. Well, finally, after more than an hour, another car came down the road. Then they pulled over. It was a clunker, if you know what I mean, sputtering as it approached the woman's car. She smiled, but her eyes showed worry. She wasn't sure if the person who was stopping to help her was someone that she could trust. He looked poor and he looked hungry. He could see the frightened look in her eyes. As he stood out there in the cold, he had a sense of how she might feel. The chill that ran through his body was not just because of the elements. It was the kind of chill that comes with fear. He said to the woman, "Hi, I'm here to help you, ma'am. Why don't you wait in the car where it's warm? By the way, my name is Brian Anderson." Well, it turns out that what the woman had was a flat tire. And to find a place to hook the jack underneath the car, he had to get on his hands and knees, get dirty, and he scraped his hands several times. As he was tightening the lug nuts after he changed the tire, the woman rolled down and began to talk to him, rolled down the window. She told him that she was from St. Louis, was passing through, and that no one had come to her aid, even though they might have driven by her. Brian just smiled and closed the trunk. The lady asked how much she owed him, and he said nothing. You see, he knew how many times in his own life where he had been helped out by strangers. And it would never have occurred to him to think he would be paid for doing such, a good thing. He told her that if she wanted to pay him, she just needed to pay it forward the next time she saw someone in need. And he waited until she started her car and drove off. It had been a cold and depressing day, but he felt good as she drove away and as he headed home. A little ways down the road, the woman came to one of those along the road in the middle of nowhere kind of cafes, if you know what I mean. She went inside and decided to have a meal. It wasn't a familiar sort of setting for her. The waitress came over and wiped off the table. And even though the waitress had a sweet smile, one that even being on her feet the whole day couldn't erase, the lady noticed that she was nearly 8 months pregnant. But the waitress had not let the strain and aches change her attitude. And she wondered how someone who had so little could be giving to a stranger. And then she remembered Brian, the man by the side of the road. After the lady had finished her meal, she paid a $100 bill, and the waitress went to get change, but when she returned, the woman was gone. And the waitress noticed on the table on the napkin a note. The note said, "You don't owe me anything. I've been there too. Somebody once helped me out the way I'm helping you." And under the napkin, several other $100 bills. Well, at the end of shift, after the tables were cleared and the sugar bowls were filled and the people were served, the waitress went home for the night. How could the lady have known how much she and her husband needed the money, she thought? Would the baby due next month? It was going to be hard. The waitress knew her husband was worried, and as he lay sleeping next to her, she gave him a soft kiss and whispered soft and low, "Everything's going to be all right. I love you, Brian Anderson." Coincidence or providence? When we hear these sort of stories where someone is extremely generous with a stranger, it warms our heart. And we're left wondering if those two people were meant to cross paths, that if God's hand were in it. These are the kind of stories that go viral, you know. Isaac, in the story from the Old Testament that I'm highlighting today, was now old enough to marry. Just by way of reminder, Isaac is Abraham and Sarah's son, the one that God had promised to him. Isaac's mother, Sarah, had died, and he had felt lonely and depressed. And Abraham, his father, was now very old, but began to see that finding a suitable wife for his son was the thing that he needed to do. And so Abraham sent one of his servants back to his homeland, the place where he had come from, the place from which God had called him, to find a member of Abraham's family for Isaac to marry. The servant went, and he went to the well on the edge of the town that he was to visit to meet Abraham's family. And as the story goes, he prayed. He prayed that he would find a wife for Isaac from Abraham's family. He prayed that that person would come to the well. And when he asked her for a drink of water, she would not only freely give him a drink of water, but also offer to water his camels. And you know, to the well came a woman, and he asked for a drink of water. And that woman also offered to water his camels. That woman was Rebekah. After all of the negotiating was done within the family, as was the tradition in that day and age, it all came down to whether or not Rebekah would go with the servant of Abraham to be Isaac's wife. And she did. Their meeting is summed up in this way. Now Isaac had come from Beer-lahai-roi and was settled in the Negeb. Isaac went out in the evening to walk in the field, and looking up he saw camels. And Rebekah looked up, and she saw Isaac. She slipped quickly from the camel and said to the servant, "Who is that man over there walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "It is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself, and the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Providence or coincidence? A match made in heaven? Or just something lucky that happened? For many people, what happened in the story of Isaac and Rebekah and what happened in the first story I told has to do more with personal effort or fate. Think about it. The servant went and did what he was supposed to do. He did all the prep. He laid all the groundwork. He did all the negotiating he was supposed to do. But for many, such stories have little to do with a faithful God who blesses us and loves us. It's all about what we do. Or is it? In an article entitled "Success, What's Standing in Your Way?" Irene Jackson wrote several practical tips for being successful in the music business. She put it this way, that all aspiring songwriters should, and I'm going to generalize more to everything, define success. What does it mean for us to be successful? It's one of the first writing assignments cadets at West Point do in their first year English class. They have to write an essay on what is success to them. She also said, make a list of steps to achieve your goals. Be prepared to change. Be prepared for it when opportunity knocks. Spend time doing the essential instead of avoidance things. Discipline, and having many irons in the fire. I suspect a lot of us can relate to these suggestions. We may have heard them for ourselves in our own lives. I know I have. In fact, recently I've given many of these suggestions to my seminary students who are in my summer course. Ms. Jackson made her point about her several points on how to be successful in this way. She wrote, when I'm almost finished recording a song, I make a digital copy of it just so I have it on hand to listen for myself and for whatever else I might need it for. Once, my husband and I, writes Miss Jackson, had a business meeting with an old friend, not related to songwriting or anything, just an investment opportunity. Well, this particular friend brought with them a business friend. And they happened to mention that Miss Jackson was a songwriter. They ended up going and listening to some of her digital recordings together. That particular guest of a guest happened to have a connection that would make it possible for some of that material to be shared. So, providence or coincidence? According to Miss Jackson, it was opportunity meeting preparedness. While part of me wants to agree with her that her preparedness did indeed help her to present her material in an unexpected way, her reply fails to acknowledge that anything other than herself was at work in the situation. It fails to acknowledge where her gift of music and her good business sense came from in the first place. It fails to acknowledge who truly makes the opportunity, any opportunity that we might have for success. In short, it fails to give honor to God. Another story. John Wesley's father, Samuel, was a dedicated pastor. He worked very, very hard to make sure that his children had a proper place with a proper education. One night, while the family was asleep in their parsonage, a fire was set to the rector's house. The youngest of the children, John, he wasn't quite 6 yet, was trapped on an upper floor. Neighbors came and rescued John from the upper floor. That's how John got his nickname, a brand from a fire. When all was said and done, Samuel said a prayer, giving thanks for his brand plucked out of the fire. In later years, he often noted and gave thanks to God for his mercy on the date of that fire. Samuel, he labored for 40 years and saw very little fruit for his effort, according to the story. But just think, his efforts produced the hymns we sing, produced the spiritual leader of the Methodist Church grounds its traditions upon. John and Charles Wesley. Coincidence or providence? I've been watching, I know we're all doing different things to pass the time as we don't go out in public as much. So I'm a little behind the times, I know. I started watching The Crown. It's a drama, fictional drama, maybe based on some real history of Queen Elizabeth and how she came to power, and then what her days in power looked like in her earlier days. I'm obviously only in season 1. When you think about it, this queen who has ruled for more than 70 years wasn't meant to be queen. Her father wasn't the one who was firstborn, the one who was to be the king. It took his brother to abdicate out of love in order for Elizabeth to even be in line for the throne. I wonder as I watched, was that love that was placed upon the brother's heart providence, God's hand at work? Providence or coincidence? Another old story from Austria. During Napoleon's day, there was an army, a massive army, getting ready to attack a particular village. It was a village right on the Austrian border. And the citizens gathered, and they thought there was no way they could defend themselves. Or should they put up a white flag? It happened that this particular attack was being set to happen on Easter Sunday. And so the people gathered in the church. The pastor rose and said, "Friends, we have been counting on our strength, and apparently that has failed. As this is the day of the Lord's resurrection, let us just ring the bells, have our services as usual, and leave the matter in God's hands." And so they rang the bells. When the Austrian army heard the bells, they thought, "Oh, the other army must have come in the night and we didn't see or hear them." And they left. The enemy broke camp and left. Coincidence or providence? I think sometimes it's really easy for us to attribute things to providence when they're church related. Like the time after a church event, a man's wife told him to take the leftover milk to a local shelter for women and children. Although he had fought her, he finally took the jugs of milk. And when he went to the door and he knocked, the people inside opened the door and saw the milk and said, "Oh, you're an answer to prayer, you're an angel." Sort of easy, right? God's hand, God's grace pushing and nudging there. How I got here as a pastor, I see providence, not coincidence. I see that I needed a rest. I was given an opportunity for rest, with the understanding that there really probably wouldn't be available until, well, today for me to pastor again in the intervening year. But unusual things happened. Someone retired, someone got promoted. Mid-year, I got a call, and in January, well, here I was. Where exactly God's hand was in that, I'm not sure. I just know and trust that a God of provision and care, God's providence, provision, and care, were present in it. For me, and time will tell, hopefully for all of us, right? Our challenge today is to remember that such things happen, are born of God's providence and of God's care and concern for us in every moment of our lives. God doesn't just show up on Sunday in buildings dedicated to God. The story of Abraham and now Isaac points us to a God who provides, who cares, a God who hears the cries of the oppressed, a God who sees us in the deepest sense, to the very core of our being, in every moment of our lives, not just Sunday morning, not just on designated holy ground, but in our homes and in our businesses, when we walk along the street or in the woods, when we're in the hospital, or when we're struggling with where our next job might come from. God sees, God hears, and God provides. I encourage us this week to look deeper beyond just what we see in the mirror, to acknowledge the fullness of who we are and are able to be because of God. It's all about attribution, you see. This doesn't mean we don't celebrate our part, but true celebration, faithful celebration, includes acknowledging the foundation God laid in us, lays for us. I say it again, it's all about attribution. Thanks be to God for God's providence. Amen. Let us pray.